trustworthy. And we all complain that the 4 models of turning around schools that the federal government has imposed don't work. They're not right. And I've said, well, but okay, so why haven't most districts identified failing schools and moved proactively to fix them on their own? The only reason we need these 4 models is that the districts haven't done very good work on their own, even though they should. So it seems to me that as you look forward at further education reform, you've got 2 questions. How do you reward those you trust? First of all, how do you get those you can trust in the position? Then how do you reward them when they start acting in the ways you want them to act? And 2, if you believe that the theory of action is that it best happens at a local level, but that the locals haven't necessarily been demonstrating that they are doing what you want them to do, how do you in fact drive change at that level rather than dictating the change from the top, saying you're going to take one of these 4 models to fix your failing schools, end of discussion? How do you drive change so that it's made locally and is authentic because it's local, rather than simply dictating it from the top? And those are great challenges. We don't have answers yet. None of the current legislation really addresses either of those questions. And until we do, we sort of are going to struggle, I think, with actually making any of this work.
I was going to say that I think a companion to that is whenever you come out with an idea, however meritorious, you have to ask yourself, who is the enemy of this idea? Because it turns out that almost anything that you come up with, somebody's foot gets stepped on and they're going to oppose you and do everything they can to stop it. Even if their objection is small and yours is grand, their priority to them seems 100%. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to just add a little bit to the follower question, because we do have people that resist all the time. And I want to go back to the qualities of excellent leaders. They know how to engage those people. We do not take resistors and say, I'm right, you're stupid, you need to do what I say. It doesn't work. It never has. Nobody's ever going to say, you're right, I'm wrong. I don't want to change. If we know how to influence people, we know how to engage into what they do well. I was just with a group of teachers that were resisting change, and I said, let's not talk about the change. I want to talk about what you're doing well. What you're proud of. We had this great conversation. And I said, so now, what do you think you can improve to even get better? They started engaging all the improvements. Because they didn't start with what they did wrong. So I think this is a skill. There are people who know how to do this, and they are great leaders. They're what Jim Collins talks about, level 5 leaders, that know how to do it. We don't even notice that they're doing it. There is a way to engage those people in the process, and you can keep moving. You don't have to have their consensus to do that. They'll go along with you because people support excellent leaders.
Can I just go?
Oh, yeah.
For those of you interested in following up on this, you can get a book by Everett Rogers, who wrote the book Diffusion of Innovation. And he's got a curve that looks at 5 different categories. And he said about 2% of the population will be innovators. They just love a new idea. And then there's about 14 to 15% of the people who are very early adopters. And then you've got two additional categories. One of the things he found out was very interesting is if you can get about 18% of the population in an organization to get really excited about something, that middle 20, 25% will flip. Because they're looking to see which way the leaders in the organization are going. So what I've learned is you have to lead with an idea that other people actually think is a good idea. You got to get followers, right? So, and I think, why do people follow a leader? It's not because of the leader's idea. It's not because the leader believes in the idea. What I believe is that the people listening believe in what the leader believes. And that's the first part. They actually think that what the person is saying is going to make the organization better. Then they want to know, do you have the skill to pull it off? Do you have the resources to pull it off? Do you have the backbone? And if I go along with you, am I going to get skewered, or are you going to back me up? So there's a whole lot of trust component in this thing. So it's a complex issue, which Lyle talks about sort of the learnable skills. You can actually sort of break it down. The idea is certainly part of it. The problem with the compliant leader is that their goal is to stay in their job. And I work with a lot of those people. And so they're not risk takers. They're not going to put their ideas out there. They're going to get scared. Organizations don't change. And guess what? You can't legislate this. But you can invest in professional development. You can invest in leadership development. I think what the government can do a really good job is they can be clear on standards, they can help develop curriculum, they can develop good means of assessment. There are things that you can do on large scale. And there are certain rights that you have to protect of citizens. And then the bad actors have to get removed, and there has to be a process for doing that. But once that's in place, the human part is not, I don't think you can legislate.
And now to you all. Now, sometimes I have trouble finding the first question, so people are modest, so I'm going to go directly to the second question. There you are.
I think this is directed to Mr. Kirby. You talked about how different people, the characteristics of, I guess I'm wanting to know what exactly those characteristics of a leader are that you were finding in all of this testing, and why they're not the ones that are leveling up.
Yeah, I have 7 competencies of leaders that I've developed from this. I'll give you just a couple of sample ones. The first one is ability to challenge the status quo, that they have the courage to do what's right for kids, for their communities, that they are not afraid of this, afraid of these compliance issues. They have that courage. One of the other ones that I talk about in there is continuous improvement, that the best leaders are always trying to get better. I just talked to a teacher in San Antonio. I was teacher of the year, and I asked him, what does he do to be teacher of the year? He said, I go in the classroom every day and I say to the kids, how can I do a better job teaching you than I did the day before? And then they send all these people to learn from him. So he knows how to look at himself. So that's the part, we've got to look within. So that's one of the other ones. The other one I would feature is about the external network. One of the things that's happening in education that I think is really serious, every other sector is saying, we've got to network out, we've got social networking, we've got to use LinkedIn, all these things to connect to people and network. In education, the message is, we've got to focus internally on instructional leadership, we've got to stay within your schools. There are superintendents that get contracts not to leave by their school committees so you can stay there. They've got to be external networking type people that get out and talk to leaders, to talk to people in other sectors. They're being told to do the opposite. So those are 3 of them. I don't have time probably today to go through the other ones, but I think we have some materials that can describe those.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
My question was, you guys were talking about all the different interests. So you have, like private market interests, you have legislators, you have blah, and all those things sort of create confusion. And then you talked about the lack of voter participation with regard to election. I was just curious what anybody's thoughts were about sort of like the influence of the big private money in school board elections. I believe NPR had a story about last year in North Carolina, how there were all these, there's like big sort of private money interests, the same that influence bigger campaigns, attempted to influence school board campaigns because of how much power they had with regard to student placement and those things.
Gentlemen.
Well, I guess I'm the only one on this panel who's been a political consultant, so let me say this. Money can be an issue, and I think it's but I think the thing to focus on is that if you have only 10 or 15% turnout, money becomes a great deal more significant because you don't have to get very many people to the polls to control the result. In terms of people's agenda and what that money may or may not have been promoting, I think one of the real challenges in education is that every school board candidate in America says they want to improve the schools. That's not a differentiator. The question is, do the voters know what he or she genuinely stands for? And the truth is, in most of these elections, nobody has a clue. One of the reasons I think nobody has a clue is that nobody actually has a very good idea of what a high-functioning school looks like. The challenge here is that we all think we have PhDs in elementary and secondary education because we spent 12 years in it. And we tend to think that what was good enough for us is good enough for our kids. The problem is, that's absolutely wrong. The systems that Paul runs now, or that I investigated and put in this book, don't look anything like PS 131 that I attended in Jamaica, Queens in the 1950s. It is a new world. So you cannot rely upon parents simply trying to replicate what they used to have. And one of the great challenges in driving this forward, and it's not just for lawyers, it's for everybody, is to at least convey an idea of what high-performing schools look like, what the functional elements are, and making voters at least knowledgeable about this so they can demand it from the people they actually elect to run school boards. If that doesn't happen, it's a crapshoot, with or without money.
If I could add just one quick thing on this. The only thing more important than money in politics is votes. And the problem with low-income communities of color overall is that they don't vote in the percentages that upper-income white communities vote. And so we took an analysis of our families at Democracy Prep, and so we ran 2,000 family members through the New York State voter registration database to figure out what percentage of our families were registered to vote. Anybody have a guess? Right, New York, America, it's about 75% of adults are registered to vote. Right, so low-income communities, it's more like 50%. 9% of our families were registered correctly to vote at their address. 9% when we ran this number. It blew our mind. We had no idea. I run a school called Democracy Prep, and 9% of my families were registered to vote. And so we set out on a course using our students and our families to register our families to vote and to build that expectation and that knowledge of how important it was. And so now we're up to about 70% of our families registered to vote. And that is going to be more important than money in the local elections in New York, is when they start having their voice heard for the candidates that they believe in and giving them the choice and voice they deserve. We'll be able to circumvent money if they are actually voting. And so when we have 10 and 15% voter participation rates, there's no way that they're going to have that influence. When they get to 70, 80, 90% participation rates, we're going to have a much bigger influence on the landscape of policy and politics in New York and beyond.
The gentleman right there was the first one whose hand up. That's it. Yes, sir, stand up. That's it. And then these two women to the left, and then the woman to the right. Yes?
In school board elections, we all know that turnout is 10 to 15%. And there are committed groups that are interested in being elected to school boards, not to improve the quality of education, but to make sure that social issues that are important to them are taught or not taught in the schools, such as evolution or climate warming, whatever issue. And money is not going to do anything to combat that. The only thing that can combat that is to interest other people in running for the school boards.